What is the borrowed servant rule in vicarious liability? Have you ever wondered what happens when an employee is temporarily working for another employer? This situation brings us to the borrowed servant rule in vicarious liability. Let's break it down in a simple way. The borrowed servant rule is a legal principle that applies when an employee, known as the general employee, is temporarily assigned to work for another employer, often called the special employer. This rule is important because it helps determine who is responsible when something goes wrong during that borrowed period. First, let's talk about vicarious liability. This is the idea that an employer can be held responsible for the actions of their employees if those actions happen while they are working. So, if an employee causes an accident while performing their job, the employer might be liable for the damages. Now, how does the borrowed servant rule fit into this? For the special employer to be held liable for the actions of the borrowed employee, they must have enough control over the employee's work. This means they need to direct and oversee what the employee is doing. Several factors come into play when deciding if the borrowed servant rule applies. One key factor is the control over the work. The special employer must have the right to manage the employee's tasks. Another important aspect is the nature of the work itself. The work should primarily benefit the special employer. There should also be an agreement between the original employer and the special employer about the terms of this borrowed employment. The duration of the employment matters too. It should last long enough to establish a relationship similar to that of an employer and employee. Lastly, the special employer usually pays the employee and has the authority to dismiss them during this borrowed period. In the context of car insurance, the borrowed servant rule can significantly impact liability coverage. If an employee gets into an accident while driving a company vehicle during their borrowed employment, the special employer may be liable for the damages. This is especially true if they had control over the employee's actions at that time. Car insurance policies often include provisions for vicarious liability. This means they can cover damages caused by employees acting within the scope of their employment. Understanding the borrowed servant rule is essential for figuring out which employer's insurance policy will cover damages in these situations. In summary, the borrowed servant rule is a vital concept in vicarious liability. It helps determine which employer is responsible for the actions of a borrowed employee. This understanding can have significant implications for liability coverage in car insurance policies, affecting how damages are attributed and covered.